Welcome to the Waiting List podcast. Tell us the story.
It's like many things you start building from scratch.
And then I'm like, wait, I really do like watches because
You've seen so many watches that makes you excited.
I think I really do like watches.
Yeah. I think it's a great way to see if you are a watch enthusiast.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Waiting List podcast. It's been a while since Jack, Dan, and myself have gotten together to record an episode. And as we don't usually release the episodes immediately after we record, I thought it would be kind of nice to just update everyone in terms of where we are currently. So now it's July 2021 already. I'm still in Singapore. I was in Hong Kong previously 6 months ago. Dan is in Shanghai, where he is actually based, and Jack is in Canada, right? And our guest today, who I will introduce shortly, she's also in Singapore. Okay, so I just have to say, because I'm trying to hold in my laughter, like in this episode, if we just keep laughing, it's because we were previously just talking about other things, and then it might just, trickle into this.
For the people that are listening, that intro took about 4 times for Long to do.
No, not 4, like 6 or 7 times.
Yeah, like we're like just praying, just get this down.
Can we reenact it? The 6 or 7 times we're like, hey, oh, that's too much. Hi, everyone. Oh, that's too low. Oh, hey, what's up?
Yeah, she has to get that art of seduction mode in, get back to long mode. Yeah.
I'm telling you, 800 grams of durian last night. My voice is so dry.
You are very high nasal for like the 3rd or 4th try. I was like, that's too much.
Okay, our guest today is Melissa Kong. She is the managing director of Crown Watch Blog. This is an online and offline publication, and they have presence in Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Indonesia. So welcome, Melissa.
Thanks, Long Long. You just promoted me. Actually, I'm managing editor, not managing director.
Oh,
but thank you. Maybe one day I'll be managing director.
Definitely, you'll be there. Yeah, we like to foresee things in the future. You see.
Yeah, this is what this podcast is all about. It's like when we foresee sexual predators.
That was a very interesting conversation, though.
We point them out right away.
We hope that you took down notes just for your future reference.
Mm-hmm.
So. By the way,
like Melissa, it must have came as a bit of a because the reason why that came by was because you were generally saying people in the watch community for the most part are very, very nice. And then as soon as you said that, like in my mind, I was thinking like all these question marks popped out of my head, right? And it must have been quite shocking to hear some of the abuse is too much of a strong word, but some of the
allegations.
Allegations. Some of the Jacqueline get and Long get from
the floral tributes.
Yeah, the floral tributes, right? Must have been quite a shock.
All right, let's get to our first question. So, as always, I find it really exciting when we have another female voice on this podcast.
Yep.
So I know this gets asked like all the time, and I kind of feel like it's almost overdone, but I'm curious to know, what does it feel like to be in a male-dominated space?
It's not easy, I have to say, because I like to consider myself a journalist first and foremost, and not a watch collector. I'm definitely not a collector by any means. But stepping into the watch community, most people here, or rather in the watch journalism community, most people tend to be collectors, or at least aficionados in that sense. Whereas for me, I come from, I'm a journalist first standpoint. So the interest in watches had to be cultivated later. So already I felt that I was stepping into a community with a bit of a disadvantage, because everyone already knows more than I do about watches. And not to mention, I'm female, right? And there's so few of us in this community, although I have to say that it's growing, and that's something that I am grateful for. But it has not been easy, for sure. And I'm still learning to love watches more and more each day. It's like shipping journalists. They don't go into shipping because they enjoyed it. They go into it because they're writers first and foremost. So for me, it's always been, how do I create a story about a subject matter that I don't necessarily know as much about as the community, and I don't necessarily have as great a passion for. So those things had to be cultivated. And well, it's been quite a few years now that I've done this. So I've had a greater appreciation of the whole industry, and also for the people who contribute to it. Whether they're the collectors or the people working in the industry. Right from the watchmakers to the designers and all that.
I remember on our phone call, like previous to this, you told me the story about how you went to a watch fair, and it was a press trip actually, and then you were wearing a quartz watch, and then someone commented something. Do you mind sharing that story?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I was on a press trip, and I think somehow when you wear a quartz watch, your credibility gets knocked off quite a bit. For some reason. I don't know why, but side note, I personally like quartz watches because I think they're just so much more convenient. Okay.
Yeah, they are.
Back to the story. So this person asked if my watch was real, if it was a genuine brand, which it was. And also that I, as an editor, I should really be wearing a better watch. So that was one incident, but another incident related to that was another person told me that, again, as an editor, I should be wearing a better mechanical watch because that would give me more credibility.
What did you think about that? When somebody tells you that, well, how did you feel?
Well, it's obviously not a very nice thing to hear.
Yeah.
And it did make me think a bit about what people in the industry were like. Do I really have to prove myself with what I wear on my wrist? I'm not rich by any means, and we all know that watch collecting is not a cheap hobby. And so like I told you guys at the start that I'm a journalist first. I'm not a watch collector. So, and journalists, we don't get paid a lot. So there's not a lot of money to go into buying a really expensive watch. And why do I want to do that? Just to prove myself. I didn't feel that I needed to do that. There were watch events that I went to where I just wore a digital Casio watch. And I was perfectly fine with it. But I have to say in the initial days that I was a bit shaken by it, and it left me a bit angry even, that I had to prove myself. So I just decided that, I was just going to learn more about watches, write better stories, and try not to care about what other people thought of my wrist choices. And actually that affected me so much that for a long period of time, I stopped wearing watches, even though I had mechanical watches, but I stopped wearing them altogether because I didn't want to, turn up to gatherings or events and have people ask, oh, why are you wearing just
You don't want to be judged.
Yeah, exactly.
I've got a question straight off the bat, which is, if that was your initial kind of experience with the watch industry, and you say that the watch industry is a very challenging place because it's so male dominated, why did you choose it? How did you get into it?
I didn't choose it.
This is a good cue for a very cheesy
It chose
line.
me.
It chose me.
It chose me.
I sort of just fell into it a long time ago, more than 10 years ago actually. I was writing for a fashion magazine, and as the lifestyle writer for that magazine, the watch and jewelry beat was assigned to me as well. So along with other things like food and travel, I had to write about watches and jewelry. So that was actually my first step into this world. And about 3 years later, I actually left the magazine because I didn't want to do watches and jewelry anymore. So I left, I went to another magazine, wrote about food and travel. And then about 4 years later, I left that magazine because my dad got sick and I wanted to take some time out to look after him. So when my dad was sick, I was doing some freelance jobs, and writing for Crown was one of those jobs that I took on. And then later my dad got better and Crown really needed someone full time. So I said, okay. Yeah. And to have left a magazine because I didn't want to write about watches, to go into a magazine that wrote only about watches was quite a big jump for me. But
what kind of jump? What kind of jump do you mean?
What kind of jump?
Mental jump or?
For sure, mental jump. I mean, my interest has always been in food and travel. I mean, most of us like food and travel, right? So I had spent a number of years building up a portfolio of stories in those areas and building up contacts as well. So, to go back into watches, into an area that I had very lukewarm feelings for, that was definitely a mental jump for me. But I decided, hey, if I'm a good writer, I can write about anything. So I decided, okay, why not? Let's just go back to writing about watches. It's not like I had CNN and Time magazine knocking on my door anyway. So just went back into watches.
Since you talk about like writing watches, right? I don't know if it's just Singapore or in Asia or it's something that is consistent all around the world. Do you think that the narrative of how you cover, not you personally, of how journalists cover watch collectors needs a bit of an update? Because it's all related
kick in the
to,
ass.
yeah, it's related to like showing off this wealth side and less about the watches. It's more to do with the lifestyle of is that because journalists, why is that? When it should be about, I think there's so much more to watch culture, right? I mean, this is why we do the podcast. And why is it that the narrative focus mainly on the materialistic side and the wealth side?
That's a very good question, and actually a very valid point. But if you think about it, when you look at watch groups on Instagram, on Facebook, most of the time the posts are wrist shots, right? And people are posting their collections. And before COVID came about, people had get-togethers and there would be a massive showcase of watches. And so I think that's what people want to see. And it's also for the watch collectors themselves to flex, right? I've got this and that, and I've checked out my entire Rolex collection. And I'm not sure if this is the reason that that people that has driven the narrative so far. That people want to see nice watches and people want to show off. But you're right, Dan, that we haven't explored the personal side, the lifestyle aspect of watch collecting. And I do think, maybe that is something that we should look into, because, it is interesting. Watch collectors have interesting stories. And sometimes it's the stories behind the watches that are more interesting than the watches themselves. And for watch collecting, a lot of times watches themselves are milestone pieces. They have stories behind them. Like, why did you go out and buy your first Rolex, for example? It's probably to celebrate something, a milestone, as opposed to just collecting for the sake of it, to have all the royal oaks in your collection. But I do think you're right. It's something that we've neglected, and definitely something we should look into.
I mean, like, there was that through Instagram, that whole flex culture, really took off. And with COVID, the more people spent more time online. I actually think maybe it's coming to the end, towards the end of that kind of culture, because I'm pretty bored of that, right? Before I'd be like, wow, because it brought so many pieces up from nowhere where you could actually see these pieces that before it would be not that accessible, and therefore you can meet these collectors. Even in terms of Asia, how the collector meetups, that's been happening for a while now. Everything that you would want to see, and I'm sure Long Long agrees with me because we have seen a lot of pieces, you kind of have seen, right? So you're not impressed anymore. So I do think there needs to be a different angle, a different shift for it to continue. It can't just be flex all the time. It's just so superficial with not a lot of it's not wholesome and it's not meaningful, right?
Strangely enough, right? I actually really welcome, but this is very specific. I have this theory where I feel like all middle-aged men who like say they go through a midlife crisis or they made it right early in life and they accumulate all this super nice stuff. I actually welcome them to post this stuff as long as it doesn't affect their family. So if they don't post their kids, or if the wife is happy to be on Instagram, fine. But if she doesn't want to be, keep it private, because I think people are just wired to need validation, right? This is like the healthiest way I can think of, if you stay anonymous, especially for you to post all this stuff and have all these other guys admire you and look up to you. So you get that boost, but at least it's healthy because it's out of your system and you function normally. You're a good husband or whatever, right? And then you're just like a normal being. I would rather that than somebody physically walking around, trying to get that validation. And it comes out in a really nasty way. Because I feel that, so again, this is very one-sided because I'm only focusing on men, right? I feel like if men don't get this, also because I also think men have bigger egos, so they need this validation. If they're not going to get this attention somewhere, where are they going to let it out? Because
I see your point, but what do you think about collectors, and there are mega collectors in the world that we aren't aware of because they simply like don't post?
But that's the amazing thing, because I think the Instagram will filter this out, so you will get to meet. So the people who need that outlet just to get that kind of validation, right? They are the type of people that do this, and then you have the super private ones. So then you already filtered out the crowd already. So let's say, Jacqueline, I know you're someone that values, like, you would rather someone private but epic collection, right? You would definitely know, okay, this person has no posts on Instagram, but he's serious. Maybe just through your conversation, he sends you the pictures only, right? Then you're like, okay, this person's worth meeting. Yeah,
definitely. And I think like we all know a few examples of collectors like that, and on the surface level, you think they're different because, I mean, they are so different from the 99% of other people on Instagram. But then, and that's, once you first get to know them. But then when you do spend the time and get to talk to them, you realize, like, they are different, but it's just, first of all, they're not attention seeking. And second of all, like, you actually get to know a person, not through photos or not through their wealth, but through conversation first. And I think that's very refreshing. But yeah, I agree with you, Long. Like, especially, I recently made a trip to the Middle East, and I was very excited to share with you, like, what I've seen there, because I've never seen these watches in person, right? And after a while, and I kind of got the feeling now, when I was there, when I started seeing these pieces that I've been waiting for so long to see. And it's so different. Like, we're talking about watches now, but you can also talk about, people. It's so different when you are finally seeing it after a long time, and then you get that initial reaction. Is that, oh, it's not as what I thought. So I think now, but when I first started Instagram, it was to connect with collectors and to learn and whatever. So, like what Dan said earlier, I was actually very happy to see all these people posting what they had, to talk with them. But then now with, people posting a lot more and showing off, or like the quote unquote flexing, I, on the contrary, appreciate those who are like on the down low and don't show as much, but then that you can always reach out to them if you have a question regarding something. So yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, and I'm interested to see how it might shift once COVID does, quote unquote, like come to an end or balance things out a little bit.
I'm definitely appreciative of long selfies way more recently.
I know. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Long. Thank you for that. Breaks up the silhouette, and I definitely stay longer and do the whole pinch, you know?
Yeah.
Pinch.
Pinch, yeah.
Pinch, yeah.
Wait, I have to go off topic a bit because I remember during our conversation, like my conversation with Melissa, this kind of stood out, and I remembered this. And then subsequently, I had a phone call with you, Dan, like on the phone about this. We were talking about like having like imposter syndrome and how you just never feel like you deserve something or you're like good enough, right?
Yeah.
So, you know how you mentioned that you actually really like writing about food, but then with watches, you don't feel like you know enough or you're not a good collector and so on and so on. But then what is it about? Because even with food, it's not like you're culinary, like you're not like didn't go to culinary school, you're not trained. So why is it that with food you feel like that's okay, but with watches you feel like you need to like take a course or something?
Because everyone has an opinion about food, and everyone consumes food, right? So, you know, I could ask any of you what your food preferences are, and you would have something to tell me. But for watches, not everyone is into it. So the people who are into it are really into it and are really knowledgeable about it. And watches are a lot more technical than food is. You know, for food, I can get away with saying the food is nice. This is just my opinion. But for watches, it's people are expecting a lot more than this watch is nice. That's my opinion, right? They're expecting more technical analysis, more trend reports, for example, more comparisons to certain models. The depth of knowledge that is needed is a lot more. So it's definitely on a different level than food, which is a much more mass product.
Okay.
Can I ask what you enjoy the most out of journalism and what you least enjoy?
What I enjoy most is probably the creativity, you know, being able to deliver content that is interesting, that where I can, well, flex my writing muscles and really create a story, bring stories out to people. Sorry, were you asking what's the least enjoyable thing for me about journalism?
Yeah.
She said my co-workers.
Well, I have no co-workers now that I'm alone at home. The least enjoyable thing, I don't know, deadlines maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure, I think.
Relatable.
I have Melissa shared with me that like when she was a kid, she used to write poems, like make her own magazines. So you know, like there's a creative side to her. But I think this goes back to what me and Dan were saying, or what Dan was saying about what watch journalism is like nowadays. Like, not to quote him, but just I think from the past interviews we did, it feels like a lot of it is like you got to churn out articles and you have to include certain words and phrases and by the sponsors, right? So do you find it really tough now because you're a creative person and you're trying to create a story and then you have you just have all this creativity, right? But where do you let it out? Like, and how do you actually use it?
Yeah, just before you answer, Melissa, I just want to add to that. I think, I don't know if this is true, but I almost feel the narrative, the creative side has to come from, you have to do some kind of research into something, right? To get ideas. But it seems like you already formed the narrative and you're putting the character in, and I need that person in, so I'll do the interview with this person, right? And then you talk about a lot of stuff, and then inevitably some of the stuff you say is going to fit in to what you need that narrative to be.
Yeah.
And then yet it's not actually a true representation of that person.
That's true to a certain extent. I will say before I did watch journalism, I was doing lifestyle journalism, and in that area I had the opportunity to interview celebrities and do cover stories. Now, so for that, those kind of stories are a lot more interesting. You can be a lot more creative bring out the essence of the person, because everybody wants to know about that person, and it's just so much more fun to write those stories. For watches, how do I let the creativity out? I challenge myself, because watches intrinsically for the layman can be a bit boring, right? Can be very dry. So the challenge to myself is to take something dry and make it interesting, and use words that are not necessarily technical, because then people get all, these things just go over your head and you don't understand it. So I have to try and make it accessible for people, understandable, and just bring something complex into layman terms. So that is something that I challenge myself to do, and to do it in a tone that is interesting, that is very everyman, yeah. So that has not been easy, and definitely you need to have the knowledge, the technical knowledge before you can take something complicated and make it simple. So that's where sometimes the imposter syndrome sets in, because
do you have role models that you kind of
yeah, that's what I'm wondering,
and say, that's what I aspire to, this is how it should be? Because I totally agree with everything you're saying, and I think that's where Hadinki have done well, because they managed to make it approachable for most people, and they focused on it's very story heavy. So he spoke to Masa Haru from who does the Hadinki Japan side, and he was just saying the contrast between traditional Japanese watch media and how they cover it, which is very technical, actually very neutral, but very black and white, very technical and geeky subsequently because of that. While Hadinki comes in with this whole story narrative, very strong emotional side to it, and written in a way where it doesn't actually focus too much on it's there, but it's more in the kind of in the background, and the focus is on the story. So do you think they are like pioneers?
Yes, for sure. I mean, I do enjoy reading Hadinki. I think they have done a great job in injecting a sort of a more lifestyle element to it. I do enjoy their videos, when they do the talking watches with people. They've done, like, I think, John Mayer, Robert Downey Jr., I think. Yeah, and so those have always been very interesting for me. So, I would say Hadinki is probably one of the more lifestyle oriented watch blogs that I read. And you're right. A lot of the watch reviewers in Asia, I think, review the watches rather than do lifestyle stories. And this was something that we actually thought about at Crown before as well. Like, do people want to read about watches, or do people want to read about the people behind the watches? It's a conversation that's still ongoing, I think. So but now that I see that, the trend may be towards looking more at personalities, maybe this is something that we could explore. But also, it's a bit difficult now in these COVID times to do photo shoots and interviews with people. So we'll have to see how to take this. Yeah.
I want to shout out to, there's such a good article on Hadinki, and it's such a short read. It's like 2 minutes long. Basically, they took a bunch of watches and they did the equivalent of pizza, like pizza flavors and the watch. After I read it, I was like, dude, I totally get it. Like, yes, this is the right pizza for this watch. And it was so good.
What was
then the
Hawaiian?
other one,
Hawaiian.
I can't remember, but it was the Hawaiian.
Pepperoni.
The watch they used was something that was basically saying it's not supposed to work, but then it works.
Right.
And I was like, yes. And then the other one that, when we're talking about, do I want to read this article and how watches are kind of dry for most people? I think it's more about, like, when you're reading something, you're like, how is this relevant to me? I'm never going to be the owner of this watch, whatever. So our friend, like, Beyond the Dial, Alan Formello, he did one where he just took a bunch of, like, vintage Rolex diving watches and then went diving with them, but actually went diving, like, way, like, deep with them. But then I think that kind of article, like, that sticks with me, because you can be someone who dives. So it's not the watch, but it's like, you can be someone that goes diving, you can be someone that goes hiking, or some other element. and then you read, and then you're like, oh, by the way, he's wearing this watch. But it's also fun in the sense that when you review the watch, you get to just be creative in the sense that there's no boundaries with what you can do. So you can just be like, I want to wear this into a hot sauna. Let's see if it melts, kind of thing. You know?
I totally agree.
Yeah.
And I think when again, going back to the story side of things, wouldn't you guys like say it's very different if so there are two people in front of you and they're the exact, they're the exact same guy or girl. And but the only thing different about them is how you got to know them. So they are watch geeks internally, like themselves. But say if you got to know the guy first time through a watch Instagram. So like he's very watch oriented versus if you turned out to meet him in like a professional setting. So you meet him through like a different set of profiles, and then you realize that that person is actually also a watch geek. Would that perspective shift internally for how you perceive them? Because I think that goes back to what we were talking about, whether I know we were talking about watches, but then if we were to think back into the story perspective, knowing someone through watches versus knowing them and then after a while realizing and after like knowing their story and then realizing they're a watch person, how would that be for you in terms of perception of that person?
Okay, by the way, I think if you had met the person, so for me anyways, I think the connection is deeper when it's like you don't know the person likes watches.
I agree.
Because it's like 2 layers of friendship. You're like, okay, we connected on this, and oh my god, you like watches as well. Like I have this like, and then it's like 2 layers. Yeah. The other way around, you're more like wary. You're like, okay, whatever. We have one connection.
It is kind of like that with Long Long because as a girl, right, there is that conception that girls don't know as much about watches as men, right? Yeah. So you go meet Long Long and you think, shit, man, I'm going to be talking about Daniel Wellington or something.
Maybe cakes.
Like stuff like that. And even when you do know she is kind of into watches, you still think, you know what? It's probably very on a superficial level. Yeah. But then she talks about it and you think, fuck, she actually knows what she's talking about, right? Yeah. And it's like, swing.
But it's also with Jacqueline, by the way. You know how I had this whole thing with like, okay, Jacqueline is full of shit kind of thing. Then when she started going into the stuff, I was like, oh, she's like nerdier than me. She actually knows more. It's like, okay, she's not pretending.
Wait, when did you think that was full of shit?
In the beginning, I was just like, no, I don't want to connect with this like a student.
You see, this is the whole like our mutual friend Chester effect.
But wouldn't you guys say, like, going back though, that's what draws more of a connection? Like exactly what you said, Long. Like it's that double layer. But then if you look at it through editorial content perspective, it's like telling someone's story first and then focusing on their watches. It hits different.
Well, it gives the watch a lot more context, right? Because I think,
and that's why talking watches and these video content work, and they're the flagship content for Hadinki. Well, first of all, it's visual, so it's much easier for people to perceive. But second of all, it's not like, well, if you think about it, like Reference Points is also a series Hadinki is doing. It's not as popular because it's very watch savvy. Whereas Talking Watches is also watch savvy, but then you actually get to know the person. So,
I think it's also, and I think Melissa touched on it, is with the food analogy, where anybody can have an opinion on food, right? It doesn't mean that I will always listen to it. And it depends how, if I am a big foodie, I want to know more about the food maybe, right? Yeah. And how it's prepared and, why is this so special? With a watch, everybody can admire it an aesthetic because let's be honest, most of it is aesthetic. Like, and when you look at the movement, we talk about it, we're looking at it from an aesthetic kind of view. Like why we rate Langer and FPJ and these movements is mostly aesthetic. And the dial side, again, mostly aesthetic. The finishing, which is related to the craftsmanship, if it's not aesthetic, also doesn't work. It can't just be, it's great finishing. It took me like 10 years to make. It looks like a piece of shit. But if you just focused on that, then it's like, everybody has their own opinion. It's not that great. I don't like it. You have it. And that's the end of the conversation. It can't really go any kind of further unless you give it a personal touch. I don't know if you agree or not, Melissa.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because anyone can get information about the watch online, anywhere. Anyone can read a press release. So what differentiates your voice from other people? You're right, it's your own opinion, which is why you need to have a lot more technical knowledge, a lot more. You need to be a lot more invested in the subject matter than a lot of other things. So that's why it's important to know about watches when you write about watches. Back to
I would even like challenge that a step further, right? It's like, yeah, sure, everyone has an opinion about food because everyone eats food. In terms of watches, yeah, people can have their different knowledge, like depth in terms of what watches they like or collect. But then a step further is like, yeah, but we all have the same watches sometimes, right? Like we all have the same phones. Like how does that make us different? Well, because it's more like a tool, but now watches were used to be tools, but now we see them as more like an expression of ourselves. But wait, a lot of us have the same watches, but then we have different opinions about the same watches. How does that like tell people about what we think? Or so if you really just label everything out, it really just does come down to, yeah, sure, we have the same watch, but then the story of how we acquired it is different. The role that it plays in our lives is different. So again, it goes back to the story heavy side. Now that I'm thinking about it, because
I have a really bad analogy, but
and
I think a lot of people are going to kill me for saying this kind of stuff. Okay, so two things. One is, this is what I struggle with magazines and publications, right? Let's say today, so the analogy is makeup. So I used to watch all these like makeup reviews on YouTube, right? And because there was so much like content on YouTube, you actually don't know how to filter. So there's two ways to filter. One, you look for someone that looks like you. So you're like, okay, at least she understands like the skin tone is the same.
Yeah.
But then after a while, you're like, it's still too much content. So then I actually just went, okay, I'm going to go by spending power. If this person is unaffected by price, then they can actually give a review, not being bitter because something costs a lot of money. But the problem with publications is I don't even know if you have money. Like, I don't know where your viewpoint comes from, because I can't put a voice behind the person and your lifestyle and everything. So for example, if I look at watches, right, and someone gives an opinion, let's use Richard Mille, right? People are very heavy on the opinions on Richard Mille. Their points are really valid, by the way. But then my way to gauge whether someone to me is neutral is simply, one, tell me first, can you afford one? If you can, okay. Because then I know you had your options already. You with that same money, you could have bought a Patek, you could have bought a Richard Mille, you could have bought whatever. Then let's break it down. So of course, it's very controversial for me to say that it's a money thing, but then I need to know this person is neutral. That money is not the issue here.
So
then
when
we're
you say
really
neutral is like, were they did they have other options? Because if this was their only option that they could feel comfortable with acquiring or spending, then maybe their opinion isn't very like across
I just think it's closer to the purchase decision as a way, like when you're like so far away, you can make any flippant opinionated remark, but then when you actually had the money to go for it, then you're further down that like fulcrum.
It's like food reviews. When I used to read food reviews, I realized a lot of the blogs or the people who were just starting out, they were bitter, like they almost feel cheated because something costs a lot of money. And then they're complaining about the portion size. Like, again, it's valid. But the thing is, I don't care about that because my value is on the experience, not the portion size. So I want to hear someone talk about something without having to think, do I feel cheated? It's more about just, does it taste good? The end.
Would it help if the opinion came from a party that would not buy any watches anyway, would not have the spending power to buy anything? So
but I will also think about okay, for example, like, because I don't say I see your name like on prints, because I know nothing about your lifestyle, I can't know for sure. If you did a review on, let's say, a Hublot Sapphire watch, and I don't know what you do on a daily basis. So if you say that, hey, this is uncomfortable, I can't put it into any kind of context in my life to be like, why is it uncomfortable? Is it because you're constantly washing dishes, or like, what are you doing? Why is it uncomfortable? So then that thing becomes further and further. It just becomes irrelevant to me, that piece of article.
So it's really, again, trying to understand where that person is coming from, really for your own sake, like as a consumer, because we are trying to see how relatable we are to the other person experience of this object or this plate of food. And
it's really like, I read the articles for two reasons. One, you're just finding out news. You're like, hey, this is a new release, you're reading. But the other time that I actually dive into reading a lot of articles is if I actually have my mind set on a specific watch. Then I need my research. So I start to comb through everything. And then I need to look for that voice that convinces me to be like, okay, this person, me and this person were on the same like wavelength, and then I'm going to listen to his opinion. And luckily, if this person's on Instagram, then you just message them straight away. I
agree that that's how people function. The daily stuff you see on Hadinki isn't the stuff you would necessarily go. It needs to catch your interest, so it can't just be another product release. It only is that if you had a database of watches, and you know, like when you come to that purchase decision, you literally like go on Google and you type the thing on and you read every single thing and you watch every single video, right? But otherwise, why would you just go and read it? It certainly doesn't lead to a purchase all the time, right? I mean, some people, I'm sure, like they'll see a thing and then they'll immediately buy it. I just don't think a lot of collectors, because it is a lot of money, like it's irrelevant if you have a lot of money. Buying watches is something that costs a lot of money that could be spent elsewhere. So it needs to be an informed, very informed purchase decision.
Okay, so going back to reviewing watches, and we know you like quartz. Was there a watch that you reviewed that stood out to you? Like you actually thought, hey, I really want this.
Wow. I do like quartz, but I do love mechanical watches as well.
I want to pick it up for quartz as well. There's nothing wrong with quartz.
Yes, nothing wrong with quartz. Yes.
I don't want to just hear Melissa's voice saying like, I'm into quartz watches, and we all stay silent. Like,
there's absolutely nothing wrong with watches that are quartz. If you look at the historical development of a watch, like a timekeeping tool, the quartz development is the most significant development within like the past half of decade. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with quartz. I don't know when people started getting the idea that something quartz is inferior. I was talking to this collector in the UK who also listens to our podcast, so he might be listening right now, and he was showing me his favorite watch that he's seen over the past couple of years, and he showed me this review that Jack Foster wrote for Hadinki, and it's the Citizen
100.
0100, and it's the most accurate watch ever made. I think in 1 year the accuracy is like plus or minus 1 second, and he owned one. And then when he told me about it, it was just, and this guy, we're talking, he could have, I mean, he's owned many of the most desirable watches ever. We're talking like ever. And he was telling me how much he appreciated his quartz Citizen watch. So we also don't want to just Melissa saying quartz. It's actually like, if you look at it from a very, very objective perspective, the quartz development is nothing.
I would say you mentioned something in what you said there about when did quartz become inferior. I'm pretty sure it was when basically the Swiss watch industry struggled to fought back and struggled to find a way to combat because Japanese really pioneered that, right? The quartz technology, and the Swiss, and I think Patek, I don't think they went deliberately out to preach that, but certainly in their marketing it would have been quite a differentiating factor, right? And that's when you saw watches possibly moving into the whole luxury category, right?
I mean, if we were to just mention some ads off the top of our heads, right?
Yeah.
Like was it Blancpain who famously wrote, "We are the brand who never made a quartz watch, like a single quartz watch."
Yeah.
And that was like they were proud of it, and that was their slogan. So yeah, it is the Swiss industry when they work.
Yeah, and actually, I've been covering vintage Rolex models this past week, and the vintage Rolex Sub, which is traditionally 1953, it was released. By 1970s, I'm pretty sure, and I'm going to get hung if I get this wrong, so please do reach out to me if I did get this wrong. Was the first time the Submariner came out in full solid gold, right? Now, if you think about that, that was to many Submariner collectors, I think it was the 1680, the Rolex 1680, that came out in solid gold, and also, by the way, came with different dial configurations in terms of that weren't black. Now, I'm not going through like mil sub Comex, I'm not talking about that. Like non-black dials and non-black bezel. So for many collectors, that's also the transition of where the Submariner stopped being a tool watch and became a luxury item. And if we time that through to where the quartz crisis hit, it's not that far off, right? Yeah. But we've hijacked your answer, Melissa.
Yeah.
Please go back to your.
Actually, it kind of got me thinking about something else, which I also want to address, because obviously mechanical watches take a lot more effort to produce, and they're a lot more expensive, and it makes me wonder why a lot of brands for their women's watches, they roll them out in quartz rather than have mechanical versions. And it's not because they're incapable of making a mechanical version for the ladies' collections, but they've simply chosen to put them out in quartz. So that, to me, that has always sort of signaled that they're less important in that sense. I don't know if you guys agree with that.
I was actually just having this conversation yesterday with also a reporter. Sorry, not reporter, journalist.
It's like babe.
Journalist. And yeah, like world news. First world problems. And she asked me that exact like question, and we're talking about quartz. And I think the answer I gave her was, if you look at like watches from a historical perspective, right? Like the first wrist watches, and this is, I'm gonna get this wrong, but this is from what I know, right? Like we know of the Cartier Santos Dumont that was made for a male pilot. He wanted something that's more accessible, that he could, reach when he's on flight, that he didn't have to like reach into his pocket and pull out a pocket watch. That's why he made the Santos Dumont a wristwatch. And then like a lot of his male friends got interested in, that's how Cartier started making wristwatches, right? But then, so that was like in the early 1910s, right? But then if you look at like famous auction catalogs and whatever, and you look at like female watches, they were still made in like brooch or like accessories that, or like watches that are meant to be bag watches or bag pocket watches. So it wasn't until, a few years, at least a few decades later, did it become like a general thing that women started wearing wristwatches. And I think from a historical perspective, it's just widely known that even now, like, yes, women who wear watches tend to accessorize more with their watches, whereas men, it's like less of an accessorized item because they have fewer options to accessorize. Whereas women, we have like rings, necklaces, bracelets, anklets, whatever. But men, like in a professional setting, you can't really wear that. And again, I'm generalizing. So when you talk about like, Cartier, which famously still makes quartz watches for both men and women, but mostly for their women's collection, it's because certain designs in history are classic not because of their movement, but rather because of their design, right? So like the classic Cartier tank, Louis, it's a classic design because of the watch, how it looks. Whereas like the Royal Oak, you can kind of also argue, okay, it's the Royal Oak case that's iconic. It's not the movement as much as like a Patek minute repeater. So I think I can understand from the brand's perspective why and they're leaning towards women, they're making quartz watches because, well, it cuts down the cost, and like the consumers or the clientele are still getting what they want as like a fashion accessory, but then we're also seeing that trend quickly shifting, right, with the exposure of all these horological developments, that lady collectors are also getting more and more interested into the horological watchmaking side of things. But it's interesting because like I feel no problem wearing a quartz watch if it's like a Rolex or a Cartier, but then I would feel like not cheated, but I would if it was like a Rolex or like perpetual chronograph, because I'm buying it for the Lamania, like his history of the movement, or like the Omega 321. I wouldn't buy a quartz Omega Speedmaster. I think that's just I would feel cheated. Yeah.
I actually had the same, like, I think 2 weeks ago, same thing, talking to a journalist about this. But my thing was,
I think
I
we
said
talked
to
to the
them,
same journalist.
yeah, I'm really sure. And my thing was, I think we kind of function the same, you and me, about this, okay? Which is, generally, if we see a problem with the watch industry and it doesn't cater to women, we're more like, okay, I will silently find another way around this, instead of being like, let me start a movement kind of thing, right? So like me and Jacqueline might buy vintage pieces because the size is smaller, that kind of thing. So I said to this journalist, I said that, these companies used to come back at like media and like women and say like, hey, it's not our fault, we tried, but we can't fit the movement into the case size. We don't want it to, we basically don't want to give up the accuracy, the power reserve, blah, 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 the whole list. But then now you see there's a demand for smaller watches from men, and suddenly they can do it, right? So obviously we're like, we knew you were capable of doing it all along. It's just there was no demand for it. So I'm at a place now where I'm just like, this is great, because there's nothing to complain about, because now you can just go and buy it because it's shifting. You can see the shift already.
Yeah.
But I've always been someone that's like, if you're unhappy about something, just find other options, right? There's enough watches in this world for you to like not have to worry and make noise about it.
Yeah.
If I can't get a piece from a AD, I would just tell myself, okay, you clearly don't have enough money to pay premium. So like just go and take that energy, make more money and pay premium.
Yeah. I agree. And I'm so happy that you're leaning more towards vintage.
Yeah. And it's like, yeah, I'm really afraid because I keep telling people like, once you go vintage, I used to think, no, like I'm disciplined. I'll just go.
You weren't even vintage oriented
exactly.
when I first met you.
Exactly. So
I think it's a huge influence
like,
is you, by the way.
Yeah.
A huge
I'm
influence
always like,
is down to you. Yeah.
That's why I'm also scared to touch independence, because I know once you start independence vintage, it's so hard to go back. You're like, okay, I don't see the beauty in the big brands anymore. Yeah. So I'm like, how do I? Yeah. And if there was a way to like, like, if you could, how we all have this like bell curve thing, like the way you collect. And then how you go like, okay, whatever I can afford, you accumulate, like you said, you hoard and then you curate and this whole path. If I could like slow down this whole process, like I just want to slow it as much as possible.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry. Back to my answer, right, to your question, whether there's been a watch that I really like. I have to say I really like the Zenith Chronomaster revival, the A384, I think. Just because I like Zenith's history, there's so much there, and it sits really. I have a small wrist. It sits really nice on my wrist, and I love the leather bracelet. I think that's a nice part of Zenith as well. I don't see many leather bracelets around, so yeah, that for me, the history of the brand, the history of the watch plays a big part in whether I like a watch or not. It could be from a really renowned brand, but if it's just a new model with no story behind it, just that it's made for women, then that's not gonna make me fall in love with it a lot. And I realized that the watches that I like, a lot of them are not women's watches per se. A lot of them are unisex watches. because I
Mhm.
don't like tiny watches, even though my first watch was a really small 28 mm Tag Heuer.
Mhm.
But I generally don't like small watches. So when I see women's watches becoming progressively larger, and also thanks to men liking smaller watches now,
Mhm.
I really I like that trend, and I hope it's here to stay.
I have a question that is not. I mean, we ask this a lot because I think a lot of our younger listeners, a lot of them might try to get into journalism. So it's just always like interesting to hear from another journalist. If you had to like, because I think it's really vague when people say, okay, journalism is this, 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 this. But what is it actually like when you go to work? Like, what is one day of your life like? What do you actually need to do?
We're talking pre-COVID, right?
Yeah, pre-COVID. Yeah.
So going into the office is not as glamorous as a lot of young people think, being a journalist. There's a lot of mundane stuff. You clear your emails, you go through press releases, and we get tons of press releases every day. And then you work on your stories, plan out timelines, deadlines, for print and for online. And once in a while, you have media events to go out to where you see a new watch, have lunch with some brands, and
People
that's
you
about
hate.
it. No, I love all my clients.
Yeah. Of course you do, yeah.
Of course,
Of
yes.
course you do, yeah. More because they're paying you, right?
Okay, my conclusion is Melissa is just such a nice person. If it's like me and Jacqueline at the lunch and then these people are talking to us, after 10 minutes, we're like, sorry, what did you say?
No, we would be talking to each other while texting.
Yeah.
No, Lola would be like, this pate is actually quite good, by the way.
Yeah, who's the chef?
Yeah, who's the chef? Like, mouthful, like, is there more bread? Like, where's the bread?
By the way,
I mean, we're really there for the food, right? Not for the watches.
Like, I can't remember what. Do you remember I went to a Vacheron event like not that long ago? Like maybe a month or 2 months ago, and it was at Ion, anyways, a mall in Singapore. And I'm not even kidding, but during that event, I actually got the chef's contact. I was like, this is amazing. Do you do home cooking?
What were you served?
It was, they just got they got this chef God, yeah, I should actually share, it's good for him. His page is Aptico, Aptico, and it's just like French cooking. It's like fusion. But anyways, it was really yummy. And I was like, clearly, because someone had a basculant, and that whole event just went down the drain because everyone was just like, show me the basculant. And like nobody cared about the VC anymore.
What was the VC?
What basculant?
Gold, like exactly like yours.
Oh, my basculant?
Yeah. And there's only 15 pieces in the world.
Oh yeah.
So in my head, I was like, okay, this is one of the 15. So I was really excited, and we're looking at it. And then they're trying to push the vintage VCs.
And which was the one with the heritage triple calendar ones.
Yeah, you know how before I came back to Singapore, when you were still in Hong Kong, we already did that whole like, they're about to push out the vintage pieces. So I was like, okay, I understand what's happening, right? Like they're gonna give you papers, they're gonna verify it. Anyway, so I was like, okay, this obviously the Cartier is more interesting, and everyone was also like shocked, right? Everyone wanted to see it. So I was like, this event is going downhill. So I need to get the chef's contact.
No, it's like this event is going downhill. I need to get my stomach's worth of food.
Did you feign interest in the VC? Did you spend time like to make it
not at
more...
all?
Oh, right.
Because you know why? I have the picture of if I were to get a VC vintage piece, they do skeleton pieces.
Yeah.
Like the whole thing is I already told them this is the one I will get. But
you're
if
talking
I had
about the one that Silas got it. Silas.
Yeah, Silas has one.
Yeah, that's so hot, man.
It's so good. But then I said, if I already know what I want, there's only two options. Either you source it for me or I source it myself. And then I come back to you and I need papers or something, right? Yeah. But there's no point of me pretending I like the stuff, which I know is also marked up.
Yes.
Yeah, it's marked up.
Of course it is.
Yeah. And then I'm also looking around the room like, do you guys know what's marked up? Like, obviously I can't say this, but like, do you guys know? Like, are these people informed, or are they really like, wow, VC's amazing, we're selling this at discounted prices or whatever?
Yeah.
But yeah. Okay. Last question before we do quick fire is, so now as much as you think like you're not qualified or whatever, like to us, you do know a lot about watches, right? So if you had to give a piece of advice to someone that is like, I'm ready to buy my first piece, what is something you want to tell them? Like what to look out for? I mean, obviously read your blog, read the website, buy a magazine.
I would say go with what you really like, not what is going to give you the best return for money, not what is trendy right now, because you're going to want to hold on to it for a long time, and it's going to be your first watch. There has to be a story behind it. What is it? You want to select something that you decided, even if it's really ugly to people, even if your friends hate it, but it's something that you like. It's something that's going to be on your wrist. And I read somewhere that, your watch is really an extension of your personality. It's your personality on your wrist. So what do you want to be an expression of that? Just whatever you like. Don't be pressurized by people. Even if you're like looking up to the big watch collectors,
like Melissa Kauf.
Of course, big watch collectors like me who have a budget, that's mind blowing. Yeah, just go with your heart. Really, I know it sounds cheesy, but really, you're the one who's going to wear the watch, not anyone else. So buy what you like. Yeah, and it doesn't need to be expensive. It doesn't need to be mechanical, as long as you like it.
I think a budget is a great thing to have. It helps focus on what you really want, right? If you agree, we meet a lot of people that almost seem to have no budget, and they accumulate. I'm sure it makes us happy, but for me as a collector, it'd be like that's a lot of excess, and then not a lot of focus. But everybody collects in a different way. I would also quickly add, and it's just not how I would collect.
I know for my first mechanical watch, I wanted something that was under $1,000. Yeah, so I kept to that budget. I think I even managed below 800, below 500, I think. Yeah, so you're right. A budget is important as well.
I have a question. So like, I think again, I agree that buying something you like is important because it's going to be your watch. It's not your Instagram's watch. But then how would you advise people who come back and ask you the question, like, I don't know what I like. All I know is I'm seeing all these photos on Instagram and it's influencing me and telling me, oh, I should like this or I shouldn't like this. Would you like say that?
Then I would look at, I would ask what your lifestyle is like. Are you an outdoorsy sort of person? Do you like to dress up? I think those things would affect your decision on what kind of watch to get. Do you want something that is going to accompany you on your runs, on your dive trips, or and what is your occupation? Does your occupation require you to would a big hulking sports watch look out of place in your office? Things like that.
Yeah, good.
Okay, should we do quick fire?
Yeah, let's go.
That sounds scary.
So, no, not at all.
No, not at all.
I did it like I really toned it down with this one. Okay, so when it comes to food, splurge or save?
Splurge.
Okay. Kindle or a paperback?
Paperback.
Okay.
What are you for that? No.
Kindle.
Oh, paperback. It's just that I have no choice. Of
but
course, I love
on a Kindle.
Yeah, because I want to it actually started like pre-COVID because I was flying, and then on the plane you want to like go between books, but you can't carry
Yeah.
And it's funny on the trips that the more ambitious you are, like I'm gonna get through this book and then this magazine, you just pass out like the moment you get on the plane. Do you prefer being a boss or a subordinate?
Subordinate.
Okay. Okay. So for people who don't know, like Melissa loves running, not like because she needs to exercise, like she actually likes it. So your ultimate way to relax, Netflix or a long run?
Ooh, wow. Netflix. I don't think I have the stamina for a long run.
Lauren prepped you so well. And it's like
Okay.
Netflix. I appreciate that.
Okay, so I know you said quartz about preferring between quartz and manual, right? But if you had to keep like one watch for the rest of your life, and it was either a quartz watch or a manual watch, like any, like for free, just given to you a watch, which one would you choose? Yeah,
Mechanical.
any watch in this mechanical.
Sorry.
Do you have a
mechanical.
Do you have a specific watch in mind?
I have a lot of watches in mind.
First one that comes.
First one, I would say the Rolex Daytona.
Which one?
Which one?
Okay, which one?
Which one? Everrose.
Everrose
Okay.
with the Oyster Flex bracelet.
Everrose
No.
rainbow
Everrose,
or what?
No rainbow for me. Everrose.
How dare you?
With the Everrose dial with the oyster bracelet.
With the oyster bracelet. With baguettes or without baguettes?
Without baguettes. Okay. I don't like diamonds on my watches.
Okay, by the way, if we're talking about Daytonas, what is your ultimate for all you guys? If you only had to choose one for the rest of your life.
Daytona?
Yeah, Daytona.
I mean, I'm biased.
Okay. Fuck. Okay. Oh shit. Okay, yeah. So I would do Paul Newman, but yellow gold.
Ooh.
Yeah, yellow gold though.
Gold bezel or bakelite?
No, gold. Mine is full, just everything gold.
The
Black dial
lemon
gold.
But black dial looks better with the black.
I know. But I've already okay, I can't get over the links being in my mind, flimsy feeling, but I'm already okay, it has to be just gold.
Yeah, because you're a gold person.
Yes. Dan?
I really don't know. I would say
Dude, come on.
I would say either Paul Newman or the most modern iteration of the white dial ceramic.
So classy. Yeah,
because the white dial ceramic, I've been playing with this, right? And the first, I poo-pooed it completely. I was like, I'm never getting that because it was so hyped, right? And it's just when you put that tag on it, it's not in my consideration. Now, so many watches are hyped. In fact, that watch has almost been a consistent level of hype. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where it's now not really on a lot of people's radar. People don't really talk about it. It's not even that common where people come to gathering. People wear that watch, right? Because of the
ceramic Daytona.
Yeah,
it's still pretty hyped, I would say.
I mean, and the price wise, I think it's always been about the 200K mark. I'm talking about RMB, right? As opposed to a Nautilus suddenly shooting up to a mil. FPJ suddenly going up really high. APs again going really high. Numerous Pateks going high. That is more of a constant, and it's just kind of in the background. And at 40 millimeters, that kind of dial, I just think that works for almost anything. But bar a suit. But in China, you could wear a short sleeve shirt, you could wear a denim shirt or and just be casual, half semi-casual. And it's such a great watch to wear as a daily wearer. And then also,
and you can go swimming with it because
you can do swimming with it because it's got modern. Not that I do a lot of swimming.
Yeah.
But it's also one of those watches which a non-enthusiast, aficionado, all of those kind of to some extent can accept, right? Right.
Yes,
so it has that versatility. Yeah, it has that versatility.
Yeah, I agree.
And so you don't have a lot of thought. You don't have to have a lot of thought when you decide to, when you look and you think, oh, which watch shall I wear? Oh, it's such an easy choice.
I think quoting John Mayer, it's a watch that you wear when you just want to wear a watch. But in his case, it was the Patek Travel Time. But then I can see the same thing happening with the ceramic.
Yeah. So that's really kind of, pulled me in recently. It's something that I've been thinking about.
The Daytona is also a great unisex size.
That's exactly what I was
100% agree.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was just gonna say. And then, but I went for vintage because again, I like smaller watches. But the one with the Oyster Flex bracelet, like I know you like the Oyster bracelet, but then my first watch was on the Oyster Flex, and it makes it feel more secure, and you don't have to worry about like banging around with it because it's rubber, right? Yeah, it's
my only problem with the Oyster Flex is that I think it doesn't sit well on my small wrist. Like,
because it has the thing at the bottom that lifts it up.
Yes, yeah,
right?
Exactly, yes.
That's supposed to boost like ventilation or whatever.
Yeah, so it doesn't
agree.
stick to your wrist.
Yes, I agree. It's a little bit uncomfortable, and it leaves a weird mark when you take it off. It's like you've been bit by like a vampire because like hinges on the side. It's true. Don't laugh. It's true.
For our listeners that want to ever surprise Melissa, you know what watch to get her.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks in advance.
Yeah. Melissa's laughing at us, but please don't underestimate our listeners, okay?
You would be surprised into your DMs.
Yeah, please DM me. I'll give you my address.
Don't do that.
Okay. Do that. Dan is already taking out his pen and paper. Disgusting. This guy.
What I need to do first is
face in the screen. Yeah.
But what I need to do first is to log into my other 6 profiles. One of them, right? Yeah. I've got numerous ones. I've got the Middle Eastern Sheikh. You know. Yep. I've got the middle. I've got.
You have.
Have you got European... the Nigerian prince?
Yeah, but you know, it's not been getting a lot of good press
popular,
recently. So I'm barely logging onto that one. I've even got one where I'm like a super hot female. You know, I don't. By the way, I don't.
Lugs and jugs.
I don't.
Lugs and jugs.
Can I just say, lugs and jugs is me. That's my body.
Seriously?
Stop cropping my photo and then adding a
reposting it.
Yeah. That is my body when I don't work out. Like, I don't look like that now because I started working out. So seriously, guys.
Dude, I'm loving your most recent post.
Oh.
Yeah, that is
wow,
me.
Lung, you got 4,000 likes on your most recent.
I know that is me on a bad day. I wasn't feeling myself that day, but seriously, yeah. Please DM me at Lugs and Jugs. All right, so we gotta end this podcast. I just want to say again, it was such a pleasure to have another female voice. And to all listeners, do message us. We try and reply everyone. We try. And do like and subscribe, and see you on the next episode. Thank you, Melissa.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having
Melissa.
me.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to the Waiting List podcast. Hit the subscribe button, and the next episode will come straight to your phone as soon as it's ready. Whilst I'm here, please remember to leave a nice review and follow us on Instagram at the Waiting List Podcast.